Hello, and thank you very much for joining us again on Business Focus. This week, we have the pleasure of hosting Professor Keith Martin. He's co-founder of gene therapy company Quithera, which builds up on his research to treat commonly encountered blindness conditions. Thank you very much for being with us here today, Professor.
It's a pleasure.
Now, Professor, you develop gene therapy to treat glaucoma. How, and that's used obviously as a base for which to prevent blindness.
Yeah.
How serious a problem is it? How common is it in the general population?
Well, glaucoma is actually the leading cause of irreversible blindness in the world. If you just look at the UK, we have about 500,000 people with the condition, and there are many more out there that don't know that they have it because often it's asymptomatic until late in the disease. And this is a condition which affects the connection of the eye to the brain, and we see gradual deterioration of the optic nerve, which is almost like an electrical cable, if you like, that passes the messages and the visual information from the eye to the brain. And as that nerve gets damaged, you get gradual loss of vision, which can sneak up on you, and you don't know that it's happening until late, and by then it's too late to treat. So by the time we're 80 years of age, about 15% of the population will have this condition. So it's very common.
It's huge. 15% is huge.
It's a very big issue, and on a worldwide basis, as we're all living longer each year, it's estimated that by 2020 there'll be about 80 million people in the world that are affected by this condition. So yes, it's a big problem, and we do have treatments available at present for glaucoma. The problem is that for a proportion of people, the treatments that we have at the moment, which involve lowering the pressure in the eye, it's effective for some, it's not effective for others, and so we still have a situation that even in very well managed first world countries, we still have about 1 in 8 people losing vision to the point of blindness in at least one eye during the course of the disease. So it is still a big problem.
Goodness. Well, you've recently had some good news in terms of seed funding. Can you tell us a bit about that? Who's involved?
Yes, so we've been very fortunate in securing funding to develop a new gene therapy-based treatment for glaucoma. That funding has come from Cambridge Enterprise and from the Midven Rainbow Seed Fund, which is a biotech investment seed fund. And their funding has enabled us really to take some ideas that I was working on over the last few years and start to bring them through to something which is potentially usable for patients in the clinic. So it's very exciting. We're still at the stage where we're testing and optimizing the therapy that we have and trying to get the best version of it for use in clinical trials. But the investment from Cambridge Enterprise and from Midven has made an enormous difference to helping us get that project up and running. And also their experience in working with new startup companies and helping us at the early stages to navigate through these difficult waters has been invaluable. So it's a really exciting time for us.
Excellent. Now, your next step is obviously clinical trials.
That's where we want to get this. I mean, I'm a practicing ophthalmologist. I treat patients with these diseases every day, and they're always asking me, when is this actually going to be available in the clinic? Now, it always takes longer than you expect for these sort of treatments to come through, but our timeline is very tight, and we're currently on schedule, and we aim to have the actual product that we will want to put into clinical trials finished within the next year to 18 months. That's what we're funded to do at present. And then at that stage, the clinical trials are likely to take another 2 to 3 years. In parallel to working on the treatment, we're actually working very hard on clinical trial design, because again, that's the other important part of all of this. You need to have the trial design as efficient as possible, and we've got some ideas and some really good partnerships already established that will help us with that part of the process.
And what's the final time frame? Do you have an idea about that? Can you give some sort of indication?
Well, I mean, so it's always difficult to say because it depends on many factors along the road. But the timeline that we're looking at is about 5 years from now, where we'd like to be getting this out there and starting to treat patients.
Is that the standard timeline, or is that?
It's for this type of treatment. If we look at how long it's taken to get some of the other gene therapies through for the use in eye diseases, that's about in the ballpark. So this is already happening. One of the nice things about the technology that we're using is that the viruses that we're planning to use are already being used for the treatment of other eye conditions in clinical trials. And so we know that they are safe so far and that they're well tolerated by patients. So that gives us confidence in using this platform, this technology for our treatment.
Excellent. Now, do you have other products in the pipeline that you're developing?
Yes, we're very focused on glaucoma at present because we see that as a really big need. But the technology that we have is applicable to other common eye conditions too. And one clear example that we may well devote more attention to in the future is diabetic retinopathy. That's another condition which is really a major cause of blindness, particularly in developed societies in the UK, and it's increasing with obesity and other things that are happening. We're seeing more of this condition, and again there are treatments available, but for a proportion of patients we really could do with treatments that are administered as a single one-off treatment and will work for a long time, because the problem with a lot of diabetic treatment is it requires ongoing treatment with lasers and other approaches. So diabetic retinopathy is another big one that we're potentially interested in. And then there are other approaches to glaucoma, as well as this particular strand. We're looking to protect ganglion cells, but there are other ways that we can use this type of gene therapy to lower pressure within the eye as well. And again, that's something that we may well develop in the future.
Excellent. Now, how was Quithera founded? Where did the idea come about?
Well, I've been working on gene therapy approaches in the lab for glaucoma for a number of years, and it sort of stalled about 10 years ago because we'd got demonstration that this treatment was potentially effective, but what people were saying at the time was people are not going to tolerate a treatment which needs to be injected into the eye, and anyway you don't know these viruses are safe within the eye. And both of those problems have really gone away because working as an ophthalmologist, we treat macular degeneration patients with injections in the eye every month. And we have many, many thousands and thousands of patients, even locally, that are having injected treatments into the eye every month, which are extremely well tolerated, because when the alternative is blindness, patients will tolerate these things and they get very used to it. And so that isn't an issue, and the treatment that we're looking at would be delivered once or twice, not very regularly. So I'm not worried about the tolerability. In terms of the safety of the viruses, again, we've seen the use of very similar viruses now in gene therapy studies for rare conditions, and they seem to have been very well tolerated. So that's So I think the time has been right for the gene therapy. And what happened was that Peter Widdowson, who's the co-founder of Quithera, actually called me up on the phone because he'd been looking for common conditions that gene therapy approaches might be useful for. And he said, well, why didn't you take this forward before? Why hasn't this gone through already? What's the catch? And I said, well, there hasn't. It was just these problems of not knowing that it was safe and not knowing that patients would tolerate it. And so we started to hatch the plan for how we would reinvigorate this, and we looked at ways of enhancing the work that had been done before to make it more effective and more long-lasting, and that's where the company actually came from.
What's Witteson's background, can I ask you?
Well, Peter spent his more than 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and what interested me about his background was his track record of actually getting treatments through into clinical use. So there are lots of people that try to do this within academia and never get the treatments actually through. Whereas Peter, even when it comes to gene therapy treatments, when he was working for Oxford Biomedica, put 3 or 4 new treatments through into clinical trials within about 3 or 4 years. And that's an amazingly fast turnaround. And so that really got me interested that this was somebody who actually knew how to get this done. I brought more of the expertise in terms of the lab work and the experience within the group of being able to do the experiments and to be able to generate these technologies. And so it was an ideal partnership in that way between somebody who had the technical and the industry experience, having worked for Pfizer and Oxford Biomedica and other big companies, together with the academic side, where sometimes these great ideas sometimes never see the light of day because we don't have the business experience to push them through to the clinic.
Well, this brings me to my next question. What is it like? Because you lecture, you teach. At the same time, you're very active in the commercial world, in the market-driven world, and you also practice as a doctor. What is it like being active in all three spheres, and how difficult is it?
Busy, never dull. There are always plenty of things going on, and this has been a real learning experience for me, because this is the first time that we've spun off a company from the laboratory, and so it's been a roller coaster. And the thing that's really surprised me is the speed at which things happen. When we write grants, we often will write a grant and it goes off, and we wait a year or 9 months or whatever before we know what's happening, and then there's an additional wait before things are activated. We were able to come up with this idea and pitch it to biotech, and within a small number of months actually have the funding secured to move on to the next stage. So that was really impressed me, was the speed. I think there are things that we can learn from all of these different domains. My motivation comes from my patients in the clinic, and the patients that we don't have effective treatments for at present. I really enjoy doing the surgery that we're able to do, and that works for many of my patients in terms of protecting them against further damage. But we don't have a way to reverse the damage that's there, and we don't have a way to treat those that get worse despite our best treatments. So I have that motivation, and then I can bring in the sort of academic background as well. I still teach, and I still have an active research group at the John Van Geest Centre for Brain Repair in the University of Cambridge, and this is just one of the projects that we work on. I think it's a very promising approach, and it's gone to that level, but we have many other approaches that we work on within the lab, using stem cells and other approaches to treat glaucoma potentially. So it's been really interesting to have a foot in both camps, and to really try and harness the skills from both domains, both the university side and the commercial side, to make a treatment which is going to improve the lives of patients.
Well, certainly all three fields have a cross-fertilization factor amongst each other. Thank you very much for being with us here today, and thank you for joining us on the latest edition of Business Focus.